week, another round of predictions. All the NA teams are locked in, but the chosen few are still competing for seeding, whereas Chengdu and Philly are still locked in battle for that final seed of the mid-season madness. Let's get right into it with our first game, the Philadelphia Fusion versus the Guangzhou Charge. This one's pretty easy. I don't think there's anything the Charge can really do, and Fusion is desperately trying to make into the mid-season madness. However, Philly is Philly, so I'll give Charge a map, but this should be a wash, 3-1 Fusion. Next up is actually a banger, the Dragons versus the Hunters. This is a huge game. Dragons are trying to maintain their upward momentum into the tournament, whereas this is pretty much Chengdu's last chance to make it into the tournament. Both teams are looking very strong right now, settling into the ball competition and being extremely good at it. However, Chengdu have their trademark inconsistency about them that still makes them very hard to predict. One day they drop map to the Charge, the next they beat down the Valiant insanely hard. Chengdu absolutely has a chance here, but I think the Dragons faced that tough competition last week, but I'm going to go with the Dragons in 5 maps. Chengdu have shown a bit of weakness as of late, whereas the Dragons are really nothing but up. I still think Fleta is better than Jinyu, and I generally rate Isayaki Lee Jae-gon a tiny bit better than Magnisha. Also, now I can be happy either way. If Chengdu win, I'm happy because they'll still be in playoff contention. If they lose, I get picking points. Nice. Next up, New York versus Houston. I'm going to be real, Houston is going to be a bitch to predict this week. If they can put up a performance like yesterday against these teams, they have a real shot, but I don't fully trust New York yet. They have found their ideal comp in the Doomfist, but at the end of the day, they're still 0-4 at this stage for a reason. Meanwhile, I think Houston actually looked pretty good. While Atlanta threw that game, they did still beat a somewhat top team in Atlanta, and their Doomfist comp is as good as ever, and even their Sigma comp is on the rise. I think a big reason why NYXL were able to almost beat Dallas is because Dallas' Doomfist competition is very poor. I'll give it to Houston in 4 maps. Next up, Toronto Defiant versus San Francisco Shock. Yeah, this is going to be a blowout. Toronto are struggling. They nearly lost to Paris, who look like the worst team in the region right now. And outside of one map, they didn't look great against Gladiators. Meanwhile, Shock are by far the best team in the region right now. They don't even drop maps against bad teams anymore like last stage. It'll be a quick 3-0, but Shock overwhelms them in a variety of different compositions. Next up is the Paris Eternal versus the Atlanta Roll Rain. Another quick sweep. Paris do not look good, and that game against Toronto does not change that. They absolutely threw that game. And I think Atlanta do generally look good. Hawk is still a man on the Doomfist and Stigma. Frankly, I think they're the better team than Houston, but got absolutely fucked by that C9. I take Atlanta in a sweep. Next up, Valiant versus the Dynasty. This should not be close. Dynasty are still maintaining their unstoppable momentum, whereas Valiant are reeling from a 0-6 week. I want to give it to the Dynasty 3-0. There's nothing the Valiant can do better than them. And Dynasty are just unbelievable right now. For our next match, we have the Chengdu Hunters versus the Spark. I'll be real, I do not like how the Spark look. They are exceedingly poor right now. I think they managed to lose to Philly on map 5. That's a feat no team has accomplished in the past year and a half. And then they proceeded to get blown out by the Dynasty. I know Dynasty are a great team, but Hangzhou don't fill me with a lot of confidence, especially when Chengdu is able to take hold of 5 maps. I'll give them a map, but I think Chengdu takes this 3-1 fairly easily. Next up, Shanghai versus Charge. Shanghai 3-0. Next up is the Justice versus the Titans. Holy shit, dude. Are Justice actually about to give Vancouver their first win? It's definitely possible. Vancouver have been on the upswing despite their losses, and Washington are reeling after 4 tough losses in a row. However, as foolish as I may be, I still have faith in the Justice to at least beat Vancouver. I don't think they've looked absolutely tragic. They did show signs of life against Houston, London, and even Glads. Don't get me wrong, they're definitely a bottom 5 team, but I don't think Vancouver is good enough to punch up. Give me Washington in 4 maps, because if the Titans drag it to 5, Washington will definitely throw. Next up, the Houston Outlaws versus the Boston Uprising. This is definitely an interesting one, and I think Boston definitely has a chance here. It'll be very close, but I think I gotta go with Houston here. Boston have played many good teams to map 5s, but they just can't seem to close it out. They weren't able to close it out against Florida or Atlanta, who I either think Houston are better than or have beaten. I give it to Houston in 5 maps and another tragic loss for Boston. It'll get better soon, guys, I promise. Next up, the Los Angeles Gladiators versus the Florida Mayhem. I'll be real, I don't like how Florida is looking. Going 5 maps against Boston is not a good look. I think they've been performing under the level they showcased in the Kickoff Clash tournament. Meanwhile, Glads have been struggling a bit more than usual, but with space back in the lineup, there isn't a comp they're weak on. Give me Glads in a quick 3-0. Next up, Philly versus Seoul. Seoul 3-0. Next up, we have the Hangzhou Spark taking on the Los Angeles Valiant. Time for a YOLO pick. But I think Valiant take it here. Are Hangzhou better on paper? Yeah. Does the meta suit them better, arguably? Yeah. But I do think Spark are easier to boom. Whereas Valiant have much more mental fortitude, I guess you could say. They're used to losing. It's not based on any real analysis, I just trust Valiant more, which is hella weird to say. And I mean, it's not APAC without a few upsets, right? Right? Come on now. Next up is the Field versus the London Spitfire. It's actually a pretty spicy match. Field are looking fairly poor after dropping 2 maps to New York and are nearly dropping 2 maps to Vancouver. But I just think I trust Field a bit more to pull this out. I think Fuel are better on a wider variety of comms, like the Dive, Sigma comms, and should be able to match Houston on the rush, potentially. I do think London are overrated. They've not had a very hard strength of the schedule. The 2 matches they struggled on, Florida and Washington, are teams who have had their own set of struggles to stage, especially Washington. I'll give it to Fuel 3-2. I have a lot of faith in Rush to pull this one out. Please don't fail it now. Finally, Boston versus New York. Both teams are pretty close right now, in my opinion. Both seem strong in the Doomfist comp. Valentine and Yaki have had very big low-ups, and their 2 flex supports are popping off. But it's double push, and my Excel have never won a push map ever, so I'll go 3-2 Boston. Thanks for watching. Remember to hit like and subscribe for more. I upload nearly daily Overwatch League content, and I'm trying to hit 1,000 subs by the end of Season 5, so any subscription helps greatly. Thanks.